my life really was worthless because the people who should have loved me the most, my own flesh and blood, like my own family, my parents, my own mother, thought my life was so worthless she tried to take it. I was born in Seoul, South Korea. I'm adopted. And when I was about 13 years old, my adopted parents, they sat down and just shared with me more about my adoption story. And so up until that point, I had understood that my birth parents in South Korea, they weren't able to keep me. And so whenever I was born, I had an adoption plan made for me, and then I was placed with a foster home family for a year before I was adopted and brought over to the States. That was kind of the narrative that I had learned for the most part growing up. It's something in my family that we just celebrated, that my birth parents, kind of this narrative of my birth parents, they couldn't keep me, and so they made a plan for me to be adopted. And God knew that the Presley family needed me to be a part of their family, and so brought me into their family. When I was 13, though, my adopted parents, they thought I was old enough to know a little bit more about my story and the circumstances that surrounded it. They told me about some information that they had actually learned after I'd been adopted. They were going through paperwork, and they found a piece of paperwork from the adoption agency that explained that my birth mother in South Korea, actually 2 months into her pregnancy with me, had a DNC abortion. And then 3 months later, she realized that the abortion had actually failed. And at that point, that's when I was then kept, and then I was born later on October 7th, 1995. And I was placed in with a foster home ministry in South Korea before I was adopted and brought over to the States. There are a lot of emotions obviously going through my mind and heart at 13 years of age. I grew up in a very strong Christian home. My dad, he's a pastor of worship at the church I grew up in. My mom's a children's minister. Grew up a very pro-life home. My parents lived out those pro-life convictions by adopting kids. I'm one of 12 kids, 10 of us being adopted. And so even at the age of 13, I was very familiar with the pro-life movement. I was very familiar with the pro-life conviction and the reality that abortion was wrong, and honestly the reality of what abortion was. That abortion, it's the taking of innocent human life inside the mother's womb. And so at 13, these were things that I knew about, that I knew my family believed, that I believed in, but I didn't really care about because it didn't affect my life that much. And at 13, like, my entire mindset on the matter changed because I knew the truth, and my story was so intertwined with the truth of this matter that I couldn't ignore it. And so there was a lot of shock in my life knowing that that was a decision my birth mother had made. There's a lot of anger that they would make a decision like that. I have a deformed arm. I've had that since birth. Whether or not a direct cause of the abortion, we're not positive, but I blame the fact that I had that deformity on my birth parents and the decisions they made. I struggled at this time with a lot of just self-image and self-worth issues. I thought because of my deformity, I was less than others, I was less valuable. And so there was anger because I was broken, and I blamed that brokenness on them. There was hurt and feelings of worthlessness because the people who should affirm my value hadn't. And just honestly, just this overwhelming sense of anger and pain from their decisions that then translated into how I viewed what it meant to be pro-life. I had all these beliefs that I knew about, didn't care about, and all of a sudden I started to care about, but not in a healthy way because it was all fueled by that anger and that hurt. So from 13 to 16, there was a lot of anger and hatred working through that. Like, on the outside, I was like, oh, I've forgiven them, I've moved on, I'm okay, or whatever it is. But there's a lot of struggle underneath the surface still. And when I surrendered my life to Jesus in high school at 16, there were some overnight switches. Not necessarily what I did, because I was already doing a lot of the right things, but motivations, sense of worth, security, value. But there's still this journey, and this journey I'm still even on, of forgiveness. And one thing that the Lord really convicted me of after I surrendered my life to Him was this fact that I still was harboring a lot of anger and hatred towards my birth parents. I was harboring a lot of unforgiveness towards them. And He convicted me of this reality that the God of the universe has forgiven me of so many things. Like my very Creator, who I have sinned against, rebelled against, done things that put His Son on a cross. He's forgiven me of all those wrongs I've committed against Him. And yet, I can't seem to forgive my birth parents for the wrongs that they've committed against me. And that was something that I struggled with for months. That conviction and that conflict of God's forgiven me of so much, but I don't want to forgive my birth parents of what they've done. And the Lord really used a couple different things in my life that really kind of helped me in my journey. One of those was through my pro-life involvement. My senior year of high school, I started sharing my testimony. And when I did that, something that happened time and time again after I shared my story is I would have post-abortive women come up to me afterwards, and they'd be in tears. They'd be just very visibly shaken, and they would share with me, for whatever reason, they would share with me that they had had an abortion in their past. And they would share about their circumstances, they'd share about the fear they had, they'd share about all the things that led up to it. And the Lord used that to really soften my heart towards post-abortive women. Because up until that point, I had demonized them. I thought they were the worst of the worst, the scum of the earth. I thought it was people like them who made me the way I was, broken and less than others, just like my birth mother had. But as the Lord changed my heart, and as I heard these stories, I was reminded of the reality that they're people too, who God loves, who God values, and who feel the brokenness of their sin, who feel the brokenness of the decisions that they have made. And so as I heard story after story after story of women and men who had made those decisions in their past and how it was haunting them years, decades afterwards, the Lord really used that to soften my heart towards my birth parents. If it were not for the influence of my adopted parents in my life, if it was not for them loving me, showing me Jesus constantly, I don't know if I would have ever honestly been brought out of that darkness, because I hit a deep, dark hole really quick. And it was my parents pouring me right back to the light of Jesus that changed my life. When I found out I was an abortion survivor, that was something you kind of kept close to the chest because I wasn't really sure what to do with it. And at that time, I didn't even know other abortion survivors really existed. I'm talking about 15 years ago. I thought I was kind of unique in that. And so that's something that I wasn't really sure what to do with that and what that looked like. And so then as the years progressed, and as I got to meet other abortion survivors, there was just this overwhelming sense of like, okay, yeah, there's others dealing with the same thing. I mean, I remember when I first found out, I almost didn't want to talk about it because I was like, I didn't think that was a thing. Like, I didn't think that there were abortion survivors. And so how could I be like there's almost a sense of like, hey, we've got this report that says this, but like, I didn't even know that was a thing. And so as I've progressed just in that work and through time and have gotten to meet others, it's just been awesome to know, yeah, there are more, and it happens a lot more than we think. And a lot of those feelings, a lot of those emotions, a lot of those struggles I dealt with, they're dealing with too. And it makes so much more sense. So I believe it's so important for abortion survivors to share their stories, because we're talking about populations of people who've been exterminated without any voice at all. And when we talk about abortion survivors sharing their story, we're talking about people who were supposed to be a part of those generations that have been lost, coming forth and being a voice for those who had no voice. When we think about the greatest atrocities in our society, in our history, when we think about what Hitler did, when we think about the concentration camps, when we think about all the Holocaust, all of those things, the most powerful pieces to remind us and to change us on those matters is when people see the damage that was done. When people would walk through those camps, when they would see the bodies. And we live in a world that has gotten so good at killing, we yearly can take millions of lives without anybody ever seeing them. And so when we talk about abortion survivors sharing their story, we're talking about members of those populations of people being able to come forward and put a face to the issue, give a voice to those who've been silenced. And so it's so important for abortion survivors, I believe, to share their story. By sharing my story, my main goal and my main hope behind sharing my story is that people would see Jesus. Because at the end of the day, He's the answer. And here's the reality. We live in a very broken, fallen, messed up world. And I believe abortion and everything surrounding that is the greatest evil of our day. Because we take what should be most protected, what should be most sacred, what should be most valued, the unborn life, what should be the most safest place in the world, the womb of a mother. And we've made it one of the most deadliest places. And so in sharing my story, my hope is, yes, to advocate for the unborn, to, yes, bring healing to those who have made those poor decisions. But ultimately, my goal is for people to come see Jesus, to have a relationship with Him, to know Him, and to see the gospel change their lives. And as the gospel changes the lives of people, it then changes the lives of the world around us. Because that's what we need. Jesus, nothing else. Where I am today, I'm a student minister at a church here in Edmond, Oklahoma. I've been at that church for a couple of years now. I vocationally have been in ministry for about 8 years, and then I also speak alongside of that work. I had the privilege of celebrating 5 years of marriage just this past year with my wife. We have one daughter who's about to turn 2, and we actually have our second on the way who's due here in the next month at the time of shooting this video. And so we're super thankful, really enjoying life right now. It's surreal having a kid. I mean, it's like, I don't want to get too graphic, right? But like, I mean, like you're in the delivery room, right? And it's like all these people in there. It's like boom, boom, boom. Things are happening. Lights are everywhere. You have no idea what's going on. And then next thing you know, you got this nurse handing you like this little human being, like, hey, you want to hold him? And you're like, am I supposed to be doing that? Like my daughter, when she was born, she was 5 pounds, 2 ounces. So she was little. I mean, I'd hold her in my forearm like this. Like, I mean, it was just insane. And then you're in the hospital with them a couple of days, and then they're like, all right, take this little human being home. And you're like, oh, like, I don't know, like, what are we doing here? But man, it's awesome. Like, I mean, it's just crazy to look down and see a little human being that you had a part in creating. I'm adopted, and I love my family. But growing up, I've never had anybody who looked like me. I've never had somebody, though, that it's like, hey, I see your eyes in that kid. I see your nose. I see, this aspect of them. I see it in you. And, one of my greatest joys growing up is when people would say that about me and my dad. Not, I don't look like my dad, but hey, this characteristic of you, that's like your dad. And that was powerful. But there's something just powerful about, like, I look down at this little human being and it's like, yeah, she's got my eyes. Sorry, I don't usually get emotional like this. This is a new thing for me. But just like that blessing I'd say that goodness of God in my life, that I would get to have that and experience that. It's been amazing. You know, I think at the end of the day, when I think about just particularly my story, I wish everybody would know that, like, we're just regular people. Like, there was no specific, like, hey, this person, that person. Like, I mean, like, it's so pervasive. Like, abortion is so pervasive in our society and in our world that there are so many people who are abortion survivors who make it through. There's so many who don't make it through. But there's so many who make it through, and we're just regular people. Like, we didn't think this would be part of our story. We didn't even want this to be part of our story. But this is a wrong that is so pervasive in our world that there's so many of us, and there's so many more who don't make it through. And we're just people. And we're just people, and that's enough for us to care about the issue, because every human life is valuable. Because all people are valuable and important and deserve the right to life. And I wish we would just see that we're just regular people.